Here's what most people don't realize. Saving money often feels painfully slow, even when you're consistent. The frustration isn't in your discipline, it's in the hidden math that governs growth over time. Imagine putting aside $100 every month. At first glance, it seems straightforward. You watch your account barely inch forward, and it's easy to feel like your effort isn't paying off. The key is understanding the compounding curve. Early contributions are small, but compounding doesn't act instantly. It accumulates quietly, almost imperceptibly, before revealing its power in the longer term. Behavioral psychology explains why slow growth feels discouraging. Humans naturally compare outcomes to effort. Immediate feedback matters more than the future results, even when future growth will far exceed current savings. Historically, economic cycles reinforce this perception. Inflation erodes the real value of cash savings, making early accumulation feel even slower, particularly during periods of rising prices or stagnant interest rates. Let's look at a simple example. Saving $100 monthly at 5% annual interest grows gradually. After 1 year, the total is just over $1,200, barely more than your contributions alone. This is where the difference becomes clear. The initial growth phase is almost invisible. Compounding hasn't had time to create momentum. That's why early savers often feel demotivated. Over a short-term horizon, effort and reward appear mismatched. Your brain registers little progress, even though each dollar is laying the foundation for much larger gains later. By year 5, the same $100 monthly grows to roughly $6,500. You start noticing the balance moving faster. Compound interest is slowly overtaking the raw contributions. The hidden trap is psychological. Humans focus on visible progress, not structural growth. The slow early pace creates a bias against saving, even though the system rewards patience exponentially. Contrast this with spending. Immediate gratification activates the brain's reward centers instantly. Saving, in comparison, feels abstract and unrewarding despite identical or greater long-term benefits. Mathematically, the difference lies in exponential versus linear perception. Money compounds geometrically, but our brains interpret time linearly, causing frustration during early stages of accumulation. A visual metaphor: imagine a small snowball rolling down a gentle slope. At first, its growth is negligible, but as it gathers momentum, it suddenly accelerates, eventually becoming massive. Historical parallels reinforce this pattern. During post-war periods, inflation-adjusted savings often required decades to show meaningful growth. The perception of slowness is not a modern illusion. Behavioral economists call this the present bias. Immediate outcomes dominate our attention. We underweight future gains, discounting compounding effects, and overestimating the pain of delayed rewards. Let's explore a concrete scenario. Someone saving $200 monthly at 7% interest will see $2,400 after 1 year. But compounding only adds about $84. The growth seems minor, though the foundation is strong. Over 5 years, the same person accumulates approximately $13,000. Now, the compounding effect contributes hundreds per month, making the progress more noticeable and psychologically satisfying. Short-term frustration often leads to early abandonment. Many savers stop before compounding accelerates, reinforcing the perception that saving is slow, when in reality, the system simply requires patience. The systemic mechanics are clear. Compounding is nonlinear. Early contributions appear insignificant because the multiplier has not yet had time to act, but each unit invested increases the eventual trajectory. Opportunity cost magnifies the difference. Money left uninvested loses potential growth. Even modest contributions grow substantially over decades, which is why delayed saving can be so costly psychologically and financially. From a behavioral perspective, small, consistent wins help counteract impatience. Visualizing long-term milestones and projected balances makes the invisible growth tangible. Reducing discouragement, consider the 5-year mark. Compounding begins to show acceleration, moving balances from incremental to noticeable. The brain finally perceives progress, creating positive feedback for continued saving. Yet most people never reach this stage. The combination of present bias, inflation, and early invisibility of growth makes saving feel slow, deterring persistence before the system fully rewards patience. The math behind saving also interacts with lifestyle choices. Small increases in spending often offset incremental savings, masking compounding's effects and reinforcing the perception of slowness. Historical inflation cycles illustrate this further. Even modest annual inflation can erode the apparent gains, especially in the early years, making a disciplined saver feel like they're running in place. This is why structured systems matter. Automated contributions, consistent schedules, and clear visualization of growth mitigate psychological resistance and leverage compounding efficiently. By understanding these systemic mechanics, savers can reframe the experience. Early stages are foundational, not indicative of failure. Patience and consistency are the actual accelerators of wealth. Midterm perspectives, 5 to 10 years, reveal compounding's momentum. Contributions that felt insignificant initially begin to yield perceptible growth, altering both financial trajectory and psychological perception. Over the long term, 10 to 20 years, the balance grows dramatically. The invisible becomes visible, demonstrating that patience is mathematically rewarded, even if it initially felt unrewarding. In conclusion, saving feels slow not because it is ineffective, but because human perception lags behind the exponential mechanics of money. Recognizing this gap is the first step toward financial clarity. To illustrate, imagine two savers. One starts immediately, another delays by 5 years. Early contributions may feel minor, but the time advantage compounds exponentially, eventually creating a substantial gap in accumulated wealth. This is where the math exposes hidden reality. The delay isn't trivial. Every year skipped reduces potential growth significantly, even if contributions remain consistent afterward. Behavioral economics shows we often underestimate this effect. People perceive effort linearly, but compounding multiplies time geometrically, creating a mismatch between intuition and mathematical outcome. Let's revisit our $100 monthly example. After 10 years at 5% interest, the balance is over $15,000, with compounding now contributing thousands more than raw contributions alone. Yet in year one, the balance barely moved. The frustration is real, but the early pain is necessary for the long-term gain to materialize. Short-term visibility of savings is deceptive. Banks and apps often display balances without context, making incremental growth seem insignificant compared to effort expended. The systemic trap extends beyond psychology. Inflation, taxes, and fees reduce apparent gains, especially in the early years when compounding hasn't yet generated significant returns. Mathematically, each small contribution is a seed. Alone, it seems minor, but collectively over years, It creates a forest of wealth growth that appears sudden once momentum builds. Consider a visual metaphor: a conveyor belt adding coins to a jar. Early coins barely change the height, but over time, the pile grows rapidly, demonstrating delayed, nonlinear growth. This delayed acceleration explains why long-term investors often feel they finally get it after years of consistent effort. Patience bridges perception and reality. Historical market data reinforces this. Stock market returns fluctuate annually, but compounded over decades, they produce substantial, almost exponential growth, invisible in short-term snapshots. Short-term volatility can reinforce discouragement. People see small losses or stagnation and forget the underlying compounding mechanics, underestimating future potential. This psychological friction is why automated systems work so well. By removing conscious effort and creating predictable contributions, savers bypass the discouragement inherent in slow early progress. Behavioral strategies like visualizing milestones further counteract present bias. Seeing projected balances over 10 years turns invisible growth into tangible, motivating context. Let's consider opportunity cost again. Money invested early has time to compound multiple layers of interest, whereas delayed saving sacrifices the multiplier effect entirely, reinforcing the system's hidden power. Human perception often equates effort with reward, yet compounding disproves this. Minimal early effort produces outsized later rewards, a counterintuitive but reliable financial principle. Midterm accumulation shows this clearly. Contributions that seemed insignificant 5 years ago now add hundreds per month in compound interest, changing both perception and actual wealth trajectory. Historical parallels such as post-1970 inflation periods illustrate compounding against real-world pressures. Savers who persisted quietly experienced eventual gains that appeared sudden but were mathematically inevitable. The systemic lesson is simple. The speed of perceived progress is not a measure of system failure, but of time-dependent growth. Patience, structure, and consistency are essential. Mathematically, compounding accelerates as the base grows. Early contributions are dwarfed by the later growth, producing the illusion that savings suddenly catch up, even though it's purely arithmetic. Psychology explains the misalignment. Our brains reward immediate results, causing dissatisfaction during slow early growth, even when the eventual trajectory is superior. Visualizing progress over decades transforms perception. A graph showing early flat growth, followed by rapid acceleration, makes the invisible visible, bridging the gap between effort and reward. Short-term frustration can be mitigated by reframing contributions. Each deposit is an investment in future freedom, not merely a transfer of effort into a static balance. Historical financial crises highlight another point. Systems designed to reward patience often clash with short-term economic shocks, making early growth invisible, but structurally important. Behavioral economists call this the endowment effect. People undervalue future gains compared to current holdings, intensifying the feeling of slow progress. Automation reduces cognitive load. Scheduled transfers remove the temptation to abandon early stages, letting the compounding system function without emotional interference. Consider a psychological experiment. Participants saving visible money felt slower progress than those using hidden accounts, even when growth was identical. Perception is key. Over 10 to 20 years, initial frustration gives way to tangible momentum. Growth that once seemed invisible now dominates the balance, proving patience and consistency are the real drivers. This systemic understanding reframes early pain. Slow growth isn't failure. It's an essential part of building a foundation strong enough to support exponential accumulation. Ultimately, the math and psychology converge. Human perception underestimates the power of time and compounding. Recognizing this gap is critical to aligning behavior with long-term outcomes. Let's examine real numbers. Saving $300 per month at 6% annual growth grows to roughly $22,000 after 10 years. Early contributions barely moved the balance, yet later compounding adds thousands. This illustrates a fundamental principle. The speed of perceived growth is deceptive. Your early efforts are invisible, but they accumulate into significant long-term results. Behavioral psychology explains why people abandon saving too soon. Frustration during early stagnation overshadows rational calculations about long-term growth potential. Visual metaphors help. Picture a small plant growing in a pot. Initially, growth is almost imperceptible, but after months it begins to sprout rapidly, reflecting hidden exponential processes. Historical parallels reinforce this lesson. During periods of low interest rates, early accumulation feels slow, yet persistent savers eventually benefit disproportionately from compounding over decades. The systemic insight is clear. Time amplifies small contributions. Delayed gratification isn't a burden. It's a structural requirement for exponential growth to manifest. Consider inflation again. Even modest inflation reduces visible early gains. It makes patients psychologically uncomfortable, but doesn't diminish the underlying compounding mechanics. Automation and consistent deposits mitigate cognitive biases. By committing money automatically, you remove emotional decision-making, allowing the system to work unhindered over years. Midterm perspectives, 5 to 10 years, reveal compounding's momentum. Contributions that felt tiny initially now contribute hundreds of dollars per month in interest. Psychological perception finally aligns with reality. The balance visibly grows, providing feedback that reinforces patience and reduces abandonment risk. Mathematical proof demonstrates this clearly. The compound formula, A equals P times open parenthesis, 1 plus R over N close parenthesis to the power of open parenthesis, ACNT close parenthesis, shows exponential growth over time, revealing why early stagnation is a necessary phase. Historical market cycles illustrate this concept. Stock market returns vary yearly, but long-term compounding consistently produces substantial gains despite short-term stagnation. Short-term volatility exaggerates the perception of slow growth. A flat year or minor loss feels discouraging even though the underlying system remains robust. Visualize a conveyor belt stacking coins. At first, the pile barely rises. Over time, the same contributions create a noticeable and accelerating stack, demonstrating delayed exponential growth. Opportunity cost magnifies the difference. Every delayed contribution reduces long-term compounding, reinforcing the invisible power of early and consistent saving. Behavioral economists highlight present bias. Immediate results dominate attention, making early compounding appear insignificant even though it determines future growth. Mid-term reflection clarifies the advantage. By year 10, the system begins to reward patience tangibly, transforming perception from frustration to visible accomplishment. The systemic lesson: perceived slowness is an artifact of time-dependent growth, not a flaw in saving strategy. Structural understanding realigns expectations. Historical inflation cycles provide context. Even during economic turbulence, disciplined savers eventually witness exponential growth, illustrating compounding's resilience over decades. Psychology reinforces the importance of visualization. Graphs, projections, and milestones make invisible early growth tangible, bridging the gap between perception and arithmetic reality. Mathematically, each dollar invested early multiplies over time. Waiting reduces exponential potential, emphasizing why early action is critical for maximum effect. Behavioral strategies like automating deposits or setting future-oriented goals reduce the pain of early stagnation, allowing compounding to work uninterrupted. Short-term dissatisfaction is predictable. Understanding it as a structural feature, not a failure, changes mindset and increases persistence in saving. Mid-term accumulation reveals accelerating growth. Contributions that once seemed minor now generate noticeable interest, reinforcing the power of patience and time. Systemic mechanics align with psychology. Early stagnation feels slow, but it's essential for long-term momentum to emerge visibly. Historical parallels show the same pattern. Savers during periods of high inflation or low interest rates eventually experience compounding that far exceeds initial perception. The opportunity cost of delayed saving is substantial. Even small early contributions compound more effectively than larger contributions made later, mathematically guaranteeing a cumulative advantage. Behavioral insights suggest removing emotional friction. Scheduled contributions, visual milestones, and long-term perspective reduce discouragement during slow early growth. Long-term perspective, 10 to 20 years, demonstrates the full force of compounding. The invisible foundation laid early finally produces dramatic and visible accumulation. Understanding this system fundamentally shifts perception. Slow early progress is a necessary stage in a process that produces significant future gains, reconciling psychology with arithmetic reality. Let's examine two savers. One begins immediately, another delays 10 years. Despite equal monthly contributions later, the early starter ends up with a significantly larger balance due to exponential compounding over time. This demonstrates the hidden power of early action. Every dollar invested sooner multiplies over years, creating growth that appears sudden but is mathematically inevitable. Behavioral bias distorts perception. Early contributions feel insignificant. So many stop before compounding can visibly accelerate, unintentionally forfeiting substantial long-term growth. Consider the visual metaphor of a small snowball rolling downhill. Initially, growth is slow and frustrating, but momentum builds, eventually transforming it into a powerful, accelerating force. Historical financial data supports this. Long-term equity returns consistently show that patience outweighs short-term volatility, even when early growth seems imperceptible. Psychological insights reveal why patience is challenging. Humans value immediate gratification, creating tension between perception and reality during early accumulation phases. Automation provides a practical solution. Regular automatic deposits bypass emotional bias, allowing compounding to function efficiently without conscious effort or discouragement. Midterm reflection, 5 to 10 years in, illustrates the shift. Balances that once felt stagnant now demonstrate noticeable acceleration, creating tangible feedback reinforcing continued saving. Mathematical principles confirm this pattern. Compound interest, calculated over time, produces exponential results from modest early contributions, proving the invisible growth is real and reliable. Inflation and fees create additional friction. Early growth appears even slower in nominal terms, But these factors don't negate the eventual compounding effect if contributions continue consistently. Visualizing progress transforms perception. Graphs showing initial flat growth followed by rapid acceleration illustrate the invisible mechanics, making patience psychologically manageable. Opportunity cost is stark. Delaying contributions reduces the cumulative effect of compounding, emphasizing the importance of starting early, even with small amounts. Behavioral strategies like milestone visualization or automated deposits mitigate impatience, turning a psychologically slow process into a perceivable journey with tangible checkpoints. Midterm accumulation reveals momentum. Interest contributions begin to exceed raw savings, creating visible growth that feels satisfying and reinforces the long-term habit. Systemic lessons are clear. Perceived slowness is a normal artifact of exponential growth. Early stagnation is not failure. It is the groundwork for future acceleration. Historical parallels highlight compounding resilience. Savers who persisted through inflation, recessions, or low interest rates eventually saw dramatic accumulation, confirming the math's consistency. Psychology and arithmetic converge. Understanding the delay in visible results aligns perception with structural reality, reducing frustration and reinforcing disciplined behavior. Long-term perspective, 10 to 20 years, demonstrates compounding's full effect. Early efforts yield exponential results that surpass initial expectations, illustrating patience's ultimate reward. This is why saving feels slow initially. Early contributions are foundational, laying the invisible groundwork for the dramatic growth that emerges later. Present bias explains much of the frustration. The brain prioritizes immediate feedback, causing early compounding to feel underwhelming despite its critical role in future accumulation. Visual metaphors like growing snowballs or stacked coins help bridge perception and reality, making invisible growth psychologically tangible over time. Delayed gratification becomes meaningful when time is understood as an amplifier, not a cost. The system rewards patience and consistent behavior over decades. Automated systems remove emotional interference. By consistently saving without conscious effort, individuals allow compounding to unfold naturally, overcoming early discouragement. Midterm reflection shows progress acceleration. What seemed insignificant early now visibly increases, reinforcing positive feedback and motivating persistence without relying on immediate reward. Historical market analysis supports this pattern. Long-term growth consistently exceeds short-term perception, demonstrating the universality of compounding across economic conditions. Behavioral economics confirms the challenge. People misjudge time's effect on growth, making early stages feel slower than they are and emphasizing the importance of structural understanding. Psychological strategies like projecting balances or milestone goals reduce discouragement, making early contributions meaningful and reinforcing consistent saving behavior. Long-term outcomes reveal the system's elegance. Money that felt slow to grow early suddenly becomes substantial, showing how structure, time, and patience combine to create wealth. Ultimately, saving feels slow because perception lags behind arithmetic. Recognizing the gap allows for more rational behavior, patience, and strategic consistency in long-term financial planning. In conclusion, the frustration of slow early savings is a natural phase of compounding. Patience, automation, and understanding systemic mechanics transform initial stagnation into long-term growth, creating clarity and financial perspective